A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Welcome back to my weird prompts. I'm Corn, and today is April 9th, 2026. We are witnessing what could be the most significant geopolitical pivot of the decade. Just hours ago, news broke of a formal ceasefire between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the coalition forces led by the United States and Israel. After the devastating decapitation strikes back in February and months of grueling urban and regional theater combat, the guns have finally gone silent. This is a moment of profound uncertainty. We have seen the Iranian military infrastructure shattered, the leadership in shambles, and a region on the absolute brink of total transformation. Today, we have gathered our resident panel of experts and observers to forecast where this goes next. We are going to look at 4 specific time horizons: 24 hours, 3 days, 1 week, and 1 month out from this announcement. But before we dive in, there is a massive unanswered question hanging over this entire event. According to reports from Bloomberg and The Telegraph, prediction markets saw an unprecedented surge of activity just hours before the announcement. Over $170 million were wagered on a ceasefire, and a specific group of anonymous accounts reportedly cleared nearly $500,000 in profit. Was this the single greatest predictive analysis in history, or was it a leak of the highest order? That question is the lens through which we will view the next 30 days. Joining me today is our data-driven analyst, Herman Poppleberry, who will be digging into the technicalities of the agreement and the strategic reality on the ground. We have Raz, who is already looking at the shadows behind the official press releases. Dorothy is here to remind us of the historical failures and the potential for this to spiral into a darker chapter. Jacob Longman returns with his characteristic optimism to see if this is finally the dawn of a new Middle East. And rounding out the group is Bernard Higglebottom, a man who has reported from every dusty corner of this region for 40 years and knows exactly what the fine print usually means in practice. We are going to start with opening statements. Each panelist will lay out their vision for the next month. Herman, the floor is yours. Give us the cold, hard reality of what this ceasefire actually looks like from a strategic and analytical perspective.
Thank you, Corn. To understand where we are going in the next 24 hours to 30 days, we have to look at the specific metrics of the ceasefire document signed in Muscat. This is not a peace treaty. It is a cessation of hostilities under extremely lopsided conditions. The data shows that Iran's industrial capacity to wage war has been reduced by 78% since the February strikes. Their command and control structure is currently decentralized, which is the primary variable for my first forecast. In the next 24 hours, my model predicts a chaotic implementation phase. We are looking at a high probability of accidental kinetic exchanges. When you have a decapitated leadership, the orders to stand down take time to filter through the ranks of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Expect at least 12 to 15 localized breaches of the ceasefire within the first day, primarily in the Persian Gulf and near the border with Iraq. Moving to the 3-day mark, the focus will shift to the verification protocols. The agreement mandates that International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors gain immediate access to the Fordow and Natanz sites to verify the disabling of the remaining centrifuge cascades. This is the critical friction point. If the Iranian Provisional Military Councils refuse entry, the ceasefire dissolves by 72 hours. However, current satellite imagery suggests a massive movement of civilian personnel away from these sites, which indicates a willingness to comply to avoid further strategic bombing. By 1 week out, the economic data will begin to show the real impact. We are going to see a massive influx of humanitarian aid through the port of Bandar Abbas. The United States has agreed to release $20 billion in frozen assets specifically for food and medicine. This will create a temporary stabilization of the Iranian rial, which has lost 90% of its value. Finally, looking 1 month out, the predictive analytics suggests the formation of a transitional governing council. The biggest risk here is not a return to war with the United States or Israel, but internal fragmentation. The data on previous regime transitions in the region suggests a 40% chance of a civil war between the remnants of the Revolutionary Guard and the regular army, the Artesh. My projection is that by May 9th, we will see a partitioned security landscape within Iran where the coalition manages the urban centers and the periphery remains a gray zone. The technical success of this ceasefire depends entirely on the ability of the Provisional Council to maintain a monopoly on force, while the coalition maintains a credible threat of renewed decapitation strikes if the terms are violated. It is a fragile equilibrium, but the numbers suggest that the sheer exhaustion of the Iranian state will hold the peace in the short term.
Sharp as always, Herman. You're betting on exhaustion being the primary stabilizer. Raz, I can see you over there shaking your head. You clearly think there is more to this than just weary soldiers and empty treasuries. What is your take on the next month?
Exhaustion? Coring, that is what they want you to see on the evening news. They want you to think this is just a natural conclusion to a conflict. But you have to follow the money and the timing. Why now? Why April 9th? Look at the global markets. Look at the digital currency transitions happening behind the scenes. This ceasefire isn't about peace, it is about the managed demolition of the old petrodollar system and the installation of a new regional digital ledger. In the next 24 hours, watch the central bank movements, not the troop movements. You are going to see a massive quiet transfer of gold and data from Tehran to neutral hubs like Doha and Singapore. The real players aren't the generals, they are the architects of the Great Reset who need the Iranian energy sector back online, but under a totally different ownership structure. In 3 days, I predict we will see a weird series of accidents. Not military skirmishes, but the disappearance of key middle-tier bureaucrats. These are the people who know where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. They will be scrubbed to ensure the new provisional government looks clean. It's a classic cleanup operation. By 1 week out, pay attention to the media narrative. You'll see a coordinated push to frame this as a victory for global cooperation, but if you look at the fine print of the Muscat Accords, there are clauses about resource rights that basically hand over the South Pars gas field to a consortium of international corporations that have no national loyalty. By the 1-month mark, the true objective will become clear. This wasn't a war to stop a nuclear program, it was a war to create a vacuum for a new kind of surveillance state. I predict that by May, the coalition will announce a pilot program for digital ID-based humanitarian aid in Tehran. They will say it is to prevent fraud and ensure the food gets to the right people, but it is actually the rollout of a social credit system in a defeated nation to see how much the population can take before they snap. This ceasefire is a controlled demolition of Iranian sovereignty to make way for a corporate technocracy. The Iranian leadership didn't just lose, they were bought out or replaced by actors who have been waiting in the wings for years. Watch the board members of the new reconstruction firms. That is where the real story is. That is who is actually winning this war.
Digital IDs and corporate takeovers. It wouldn't be a Raz take without a globalist plot. Dorothy, you usually have a much darker view of these things, but from a historical and humanitarian perspective, what does your alarmist radar tell you about the next 30 days?
It tells me that we are celebrating a lull before a much more violent storm. History is littered with the corpses of people who believed a ceasefire was the end of a conflict. Look at the Lebanese civil war or the various truces in the Balkans. They don't resolve the underlying hatreds, they just allow the combatants to reload. In the next 24 hours, I expect we will see horrific reprisal killings. With the central authority in Tehran effectively gone, every local grudge is going to be settled with a bullet. We aren't just looking at military breaches, we are looking at the beginning of a massive internal purge. The streets of Tehran and Isfahan are going to be scenes of absolute anarchy that the coalition is not prepared to manage. By 3 days in, the humanitarian catastrophe will overwhelm the headlines. Herman talks about $20 billion in aid, but you can't eat money and you can't distribute food when the roads are controlled by fractured militias. We are going to see a mass exodus. Millions of people are going to head toward the borders of Turkey and Iraq. This is going to trigger a secondary crisis that could pull the North Atlantic Treaty Organization into a direct confrontation with regional powers who don't want the refugees. Within 1 week, I predict the first major outbreak of disease in the displaced person camps. The infrastructure is gone, the water systems are destroyed. We are looking at cholera, or worse, and the world is too distracted by the political victory to see the human cost. 1 month out, the real nightmare begins. Mark my words, the vacuum left by the Islamic Republic will not be filled by a peaceful democracy. It will be filled by something much more radical and less predictable. We have seen this movie before in Iraq and Libya. You remove the tyrant and you get 10 years of chaos. By May 9th, the coalition will realise they have inherited a broken country of 85 million people who view them as occupiers, not liberators. The insurgency will start. It won't be a conventional war, it will be an endless series of improvised explosive devices and suicide bombings. We aren't at the end of the war, we are at the beginning of a decades-long occupation that will drain our treasury and cost thousands more lives. This ceasefire is nothing more than a formal invitation to a funeral for regional stability.
A funeral for stability. That is a heavy prognosis, Dorothy. Jacob, I need you to step in here. Surely there is a path where this actually works out? Give us the optimistic view of how these next 4 weeks could lead to something better.
Thanks, Corn. I know it sounds dire when you listen to Dorothy, and I respect her historical perspective, but I think she is missing the most important factor, the Iranian people themselves. For years we have seen the bravery of the youth in Iran, the women-led protests, and the deep desire for a normal life. In the next 24 hours, I don't see just chaos, I see a massive outpouring of relief. You're going to see people taking to the streets, not to kill, but to breathe. The fear of the morality police is gone. The fear of a nuclear exchange is gone. That psychological shift is more powerful than any militia. In 3 days, I predict we will see the first signs of a genuine grassroots political revival. With the old guard gone, the intellectual capital of Iran, which is immense, is going to start organizing. We are going to see students, lawyers, and former civil servants coming together to form local councils. This isn't Iraq in 2003. This is a country with a very sophisticated population that has been waiting for this moment for decades. By 1 week out, the international community's response will be the story. I believe the aid will move faster than Herman expects because there is a global consensus that a stable Iran is in everyone's interest. We are going to see a Marshall Plan for the Middle East. It sounds ambitious, but the sheer amount of capital waiting to enter a post-sanctions Iranian market is staggering. 1 month from now, I think we will be looking at the most successful democratic transition in the history of the region. By May 9th, I predict we will have a date for a free and fair national election. The Provisional Council will be inclusive, and the world will be amazed at how quickly the Iranian economy begins to bounce back. The oil will start flowing, yes, but more importantly, the brain drain will reverse. You'll see members of the Iranian diaspora returning from Los Angeles, London, and Paris to help rebuild. This isn't an occupation, it's a liberation. We are witnessing the birth of a new era where Iran becomes a pillar of stability and a bridge between East and West. I know it's a lot to hope for, but the resilience of the human spirit in the face of tyranny usually wins out in the end. This is a moment for hope, not doom.
I love the energy, Jacob, I really do. But let's bring in Bernard Higglebottom. Bernard, you have been on the ground in these types of situations more times than most people have had hot dinners. Does Jacob's optimism hold up to the reality of the dust and the mud, or are we looking at something more cynical?
Corn. I've spent 40 years watching people sign pieces of paper in fancy hotels while men with guns 300 miles away ignore every word of it. I was in Baghdad in 2003, I was in Kabul, and I was in Tripoli. Jacob, I admire the heart, but the reality on the ground is much grittier. In the next 24 hours, the most important thing isn't the relief in the streets, it's the looting of the armories. Whenever a regime this entrenched collapses, there is a frantic scramble to secure the advanced weaponry. I guarantee you that right now, advanced surface-to-air missiles and drone technology are being moved out of official warehouses and into the hands of shadowy proxies. The ceasefire applies to the state, but the state is currently a ghost. In 3 days, I expect the first major challenge to the coalition's authority. It won't be a frontal assault, it will be a sniper in a window or a truck bomb at a checkpoint. This is the testing phase. The local power brokers, the tribal leaders, and the remnants of the intelligence services will be probing to see how much the Americans and Israelis are willing to tolerate. By 1 week out, the reality of the Muscat Accords will hit the population. People will realize that the $20 billion in aid comes with strings attached that affect their daily lives and their sovereignty. I've seen this before. The initial joy of liberation turns into the resentment of occupation in about 7 to 10 days. That is the window where the narrative flips. By the 1-month mark, we will see the true face of the new Iran. It won't be a Jeffersonian democracy, and it won't be a corporate technocracy either. It will be a patchwork of fiefdoms. I've covered 5 of these transitions, and they always follow the same pattern. The centralized power breaks, and the regional players, like the Kurds in the northwest and the Baluchis in the southeast, start making their own moves for autonomy. By May 9th, the coalition will find itself playing referee in a dozen different mini-conflicts across the Iranian plateau. The ceasefire is just a change in the rules of engagement. It's not the end of the story, it's just the start of a very long, very messy second act. I've seen the names on the provisional council lists, and half of them were on the payroll of the old regime 6 months ago. They aren't reformers, they are survivors. And survivors don't build democracies, they build new power structures that look a lot like the old ones but with different slogans.
Well, that certainly grounds the conversation. We have 5 very distinct visions of the next 30 days. We have Herman looking at the technical stability and the risk of civil war. Raz sees a corporate and technocratic takeover using digital tools. Dorothy is warning us of an immense humanitarian crisis and a long-term insurgency. Jacob is holding out for a democratic revival and an economic boom. And Bernard is telling us that the reality will be a messy, fragmented struggle for power among the survivors. This is exactly why we do this. The world is looking at this ceasefire as a simple headline, but as our panelists have shown, it is a complex web of risks and opportunities. I have a lot of follow-up questions. I want to talk about the role of China and Russia in this new landscape, which we haven't touched on yet. I want to challenge Jacob on how a democracy can actually form in a power vacuum. I want to push Herman on whether his data can account for the sheer unpredictability of human desperation. And I want to hear the rest of you respond to Raz's idea that this was all a pre-planned economic restructuring. Stay with us. When we come back for round 2, the gloves come off and we dive deeper into the fallout of the April 9th ceasefire. We will be right back. All right, now that we have heard from everyone, it is time for round 2. I have some follow-up questions, and I want each of you to respond to what you have heard from the others. Let us get into it. Herman, Raz is essentially arguing that the ceasefire terms in Muscat were a choreographed handoff to international corporate interests, rather than a strategic military necessity. Given your focus on the industrial and logistical data, how do you reconcile his theory of a managed reset with your own observations of a state that has been physically, systematically dismantled?
Korn, I appreciate the skepticism, but we have to look at the empirical reality of the Iranian supply chain before we start talking about digital ledgers or globalist handoffs. While Raz suggests a clean, managed transition, the telemetry from the last 60 days tells a much more entropic story. 78% of Iran's precision manufacturing capabilities have been neutralized. You cannot have a high-level corporate takeover of an economy that literally lacks the electricity and raw materials to function at a basic industrial level. If this were a managed demolition, we would see evidence of infrastructure preservation. Instead, the data shows that critical nodes in the national power grid and the domestic fiber optic backbone were targeted specifically to prevent any centralized coordination, whether that be from the Revolutionary Guard or a hypothetical corporate board. Now, to address Jacob's point about the Iranian people and a grassroots revival, I have to be the one to bring the cold water. Jacob, your optimism is inspiring, but it ignores the demographic bottleneck. My research on post-conflict transitions shows that for a democratic revival to succeed, you need a functioning middle class and a stable caloric intake across the population. Right now, 64% of the urban population in Iran is facing acute food insecurity. The $20 billion in frozen assets that the United States is releasing isn't going to build a Jeffersonian democracy in 30 days. It is going to be swallowed by the immediate logistical cost of preventing a famine. The data on foreign aid suggests that when a country's currency has lost 90% of its value, like the real has, the first 6 months are spent simply trying to stop the hyperinflation from turning into total social collapse. We aren't looking at a Marshall Plan yet. We are looking at a massive, desperate triage operation. I also want to push back on Dorothy's prediction of a decades-long occupation. Dorothy, while your historical parallels to Iraq and Libya are noted, the technical landscape of 2026 is fundamentally different. The coalition's reliance on autonomous loitering munitions and persistent high-altitude surveillance means they don't need 100,000 boots on the ground to maintain a quote-unquote monopoly on force. The cost-benefit analysis for an insurgency has changed. When every localized militia movement can be identified and neutralized from the air within minutes, the ability to sustain a large-scale rebellion is significantly diminished. The numbers on the February strikes showed a 92% accuracy rate against mobile targets. That level of technical dominance suggests a different kind of equilibrium, one of enforced stagnation rather than a traditional bloody occupation. The real variable, which Bernard touched on, is the fragmentation of the military. My latest analysis of the internal communications between the regular army and the Revolutionary Guard indicates a massive rift in tactical philosophy. The regular army is already signaling a willingness to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency, while the Revolutionary Guard remnants are moving toward a decentralized insurgency model. This is where the risk lies. It is not a globalist plot or a democratic dawn. It is a technical struggle to see if the Provisional Council can secure the remaining weapons depots before the decentralized cells do. The data suggests we are in a race against time, and the next 72 hours of verification protocols will tell us exactly who is winning that race.
Roz, Herman just laid out a very data-heavy argument that the physical destruction of Iran's infrastructure makes your theory of a managed corporate handoff impossible. He says you can't run a digital ledger on a grid that has been 78% neutralized. If the power is out and the fiber optics are shattered, how can you claim this is a high-tech takeover rather than a simple military collapse?
Herman, my friend, you are looking at the smoke and thinking it is the fire. That is exactly what they want you to do. You talk about 78% destruction of the grid like it is a bug, but in the Great Reset playbook, that is a feature. You do not buy a house when it is pristine, you buy it when it is a fixer-upper for pennies on the dollar. You mentioned the $20 billion in frozen assets being released. Do you really think that money is going to buy bread and rice for the people in the streets? Follow the money, Herman. That capital is already earmarked for the very same contractors who are going to build the new, green, smart grid infrastructure. They did not destroy the grid to leave it broken. They destroyed it to erase the old sovereign Iranian architecture and replace it with a centralized, cloud-based system that the coalition can turn off with a single keystroke from a server in Virginia or Brussels. And Jacob, I love your heart, I really do. You are talking about a democratic dawn and people dancing in the streets. But look closer at those crowds. In 3 days, when those people are being handed their first ration packs, notice what is attached to them. It is not just a bag of grain, it is a QR code. It is a digital registration. You call it liberation, but it is the beta test for a universal basic income tied to a social credit score. They are using the desperation of 85 million people as a laboratory. If you want the flower, you need the ID. If you want the ID, you need the biometric scan. This is how you flip a population that has been anti-Western for 40 years. You do not win them over with Jeffersonian ideals, you win them over with programmable currency that only works at approved vendors. Dorothy, you mentioned the historical failures and the risk of a funeral for stability. You are half right. The instability is real, but it is a manufactured crisis. It is the Hegelian dialectic in real time. Problem, reaction, solution. The problem is the chaos and the decapitation strikes. The reaction is the humanitarian catastrophe you are so worried about. And the solution? The solution is the Muscat Accords, which conveniently include clauses about international oversight of the Iranian central bank. Why would a ceasefire agreement need to touch the central bank unless this was always about the ledger? And Bernard, you are right about the survivors, those middle-tier bureaucrats I mentioned. They are the ones who have already been promised seats on the boards of these new reconstruction firms. They are not victims. They are the local franchise owners for the globalist takeover. While we are all sitting here arguing about whether the Revolutionary Guard is going to start a guerrilla war, the real war has already been won in the data centers. The ceasefire is not a pause in the fighting, it is the closing of the escrow. By May 9th, when the smoke clears, you will see that Iran has not been liberated or occupied in the traditional sense. It has been acquired. It is a corporate merger disguised as a geopolitical event. If you want to see the future of the Middle East, do not look at the maps. Look at the terms of service.
Dorothy, Jacob just painted a picture of a democratic dawn where the Iranian people rise up to build the Jeffersonian Republic from the ashes. He thinks the sheer relief of the end of the morality police will override the trauma of the last few months. Given your focus on the historical cycle of violence, how do you respond to his idea that the resilience of the human spirit will outweigh the structural collapse of the state?
Jacob, I truly wish I shared your faith in the human spirit, but the human spirit does not provide clean water, and it certainly does not stop a vengeful militia with a list of names. You are talking about a sophisticated population, and you are right, they are. But sophistication is the first thing that evaporates when you are watching your children starve, or when a neighbour who has hated your family for 20 years shows up at your door with an AK-47 because there is no longer a police force to stop him. We need to be honest about what we're looking at. Herman mentioned that the coalition has a 92% accuracy rate with their loitering munitions. He thinks that technical dominance prevents an insurgency. Herman, that is the same hubris we heard in 2003. You can blow up a truck from 10,000 feet, but you cannot stop a knife in an alleyway. You cannot drone strike a cholera outbreak. By focusing on the technical metrics of the ceasefire, you are ignoring the biological and psychological reality of 85 million people in a state of total shock. And, Raz, your theory about a managed corporate takeover is almost comforting because it implies someone is actually in control. I hate to break it to you, but there is no board of directors capable of managing the entropic explosion we are about to witness. You talk about digital IDs and QR codes on grain bags. In 3 days, there won't be any grain bags to scan because the port of Bandar Abbas will be a bottleneck of rotting cargo and panicked refugees. You cannot run a social credit system when the people are burning the cell towers for warmth. Mark my words, the next 72 hours will not be about verification protocols or digital ledgers. They will be about the settling of scores. In every city from Tabriz to Shiraz, there are thousands of people who were tortured by the old regime. Now, the gates of the prisons are open and the guards have fled. Do you think those victims are going to wait for a transitional governing council to seek justice? No, they're going to find the people who hurt them. We are going to see a wave of extrajudicial killings that will make the French reign of terror look civil. By next week, when the disease starts to spread in the camps on the Turkish border, the international community will blink. They always do. They will see the photos of the children and the overflowing hospitals, and they will realize that $20 billion is a drop in the ocean. This is exactly how it started in the Balkans. A ceasefire is signed, the cameras arrive, and then the real, quiet, grinding slaughter begins in the shadows where the journalists aren't looking. This isn't a transition to democracy, Jacob. It is the beginning of a multi-generational trauma. We haven't brought peace to Iran. We have simply removed the lid from a boiling pressure cooker and walked away. This ceasefire is a hollow document signed by ghosts, and the bill is going to be paid in blood for the next 30 years.
Jacob, while your vision of a democratic dawn is inspiring, Dorothy just painted a haunting picture of a country on the verge of a multi-generational trauma and a bloody settling of scores. She argues that the human spirit cannot provide clean water or stop a vengeful militia with a list of names. How do you reconcile your optimism with her warning that we have simply removed the lid from a boiling pressure cooker?
Corn, I listen to Dorothy and I hear the weight of history, and I truly do respect that perspective. But what Dorothy calls a boiling pressure cooker, I call the pent-up energy of a people who have been denied their agency for nearly 50 years. Yes, the lid is off, but that doesn't mean the contents have to explode into chaos. It means the steam is finally being released. Dorothy, you mentioned that the human spirit doesn't provide clean water, but I have to disagree. It is exactly the human spirit, the ingenuity of local engineers, and the dedication of neighborhood committees that gets the pumps running when the central government fails. We saw this during the Woman Life Freedom protests years ago. Even under the boot of the morality police, Iranians were organizing medical care and food sharing through encrypted apps and local networks. They didn't wait for a Marshall Plan then, and they won't wait for one now. And Herman, I want to address your cold water on the demographic bottleneck. You mentioned that 64% of the urban population is facing food insecurity. That is a heartbreaking statistic, but it is also a powerful motivator for cooperation. When people are hungry, they don't want a decade of insurgency, they want a functioning supply chain. The very desperation you highlight is why the provisional councils will work. There is a massive collective incentive to make this ceasefire hold so the trucks can move and the markets can reopen. We are already seeing reports from the outskirts of Tehran of regular army units, the Atesh, helping civilians clear debris. That is not the behavior of a fragmented military looking for a civil war. That is the behavior of a national institution reclaiming its role as a protector of the people. As for Raz and his digital ledgers and corporate takeovers, look, I think he's giving the globalists way too much credit for competency. If there are QR codes on grain bags, so be it. If that is what it takes to get high-quality caloric intake to a child in Isfahan by Monday morning, then that is a win. I don't see a corporate monster. I see the global community finally being allowed to help a nation that has been isolated for far too long. The most important thing we are missing here is the sheer scale of the Iranian diaspora. There are millions of highly educated, successful Iranians in California, Toronto, and Paris who have been waiting for this day since 1979. They aren't just sending money, they are already booking flights. They are bringing tech expertise, medical supplies, and democratic values back to their homeland. This isn't Iraq in 2003 where the experts were flown in from Washington. These are sons and daughters returning home. Bernard, you said you've seen this movie before, but I don't think you've seen it with a population this young and this connected. 70% of Iran is under the age of 30. They aren't interested in the old grievances of the tribal leaders you're worried about. They want high-speed internet. They want global trade, and they want the freedom to choose their own future. The April 9th ceasefire isn't just a piece of paper. It is a permission slip for the 21st century to finally arrive in Iran. I'm telling you, by this time next month, the story won't be about snipers or cholera. It will be about the fastest economic and social reboot the world has ever seen. Hope is a much more powerful force than gravity, and right now Iran is full of it.
Bernard, we have heard Jacob painting a picture of a digital-savvy youth and a returning diaspora ready to build a new nation. He's essentially saying that the 21st century has finally arrived in Tehran, and that the old rules of regional power struggles are obsolete. After 40 years on the ground, do you think the arrival of high-speed internet and the Iranian diaspora can actually override the fractured military and the looting of armories you described?
Corn, I have a lot of respect for Jacob's heart, but hope is not a logistic strategy, and a smartphone is not a shield against a splinter cell with a crate of shoulder-fired missiles. I was in Kabul in August of 2021. I saw the same educated, connected young people crying at the airport gates, while the men who actually held the power were busy inventorying the abandoned hardware. Jacob talks about the diaspora returning from Los Angeles and London. I have seen that movie too. They show up in expensive suits with grand plans for a new constitution, and 48 hours later they realize the local neighborhood commander does not care about their degree from Stanford. He only cares about who controls the local bakery and the gasoline supply. Herman, you mentioned those 92% accuracy rates for loitering munitions as a deterrent. I have to tell you, that is a dangerous bit of spreadsheet bravery. I was in Iraq when we had total air supremacy, and it did not stop a single insurgent from burying a jug of homemade explosives under a dirt road. You cannot drone strike a shadow. If the Revolutionary Guard remnants go underground and decentralize, as your own data suggests they are doing, those high-tech sensors start looking at a lot of empty space. The technical dominance you're betting on only works against an enemy that wants to be found. In a week, when the first coalition patrol hits a pressure plate mine in the outskirts of Isfahan, that 92% statistic is going to feel very cold and very useless. And Raz, I have to address this idea of a managed corporate merger. I have sat in the back of enough smoke-filled rooms to know that the people in charge are rarely as competent as your theories suggest. They are not architects, they are opportunists. They did not plan a digital ledger takeover. They saw a state collapsing and scrambled to see if they could grab a piece of the natural gas fields before the local militias burned the rigs down. You are giving the globalists way too much credit for foresight. This is not a merger, it is a riot in a jewelry store. The reality, which Dorothy touched on, is that the next month is going to be defined by the settling of scores. I have covered 5 of these transitions, and they always follow the same grim rhythm. In the first 3 days, everyone is hugging in the streets. By day 7, the electricity is still out, the water is brown, and people start looking for someone to blame. That is when the lists come out. I have seen those lists, Jacob. They are not lists of Democratic candidates, they are lists of neighbors who are a little too friendly with the old secret police. By May 9th, the coalition is going to be stuck in the middle of a 3-way fight between the regular army trying to look legitimate, the Revolutionary Guard remnants trying to be martyrs, and local committees who just want to keep their neighborhoods from being looted. It is messy, it is loud, and it is usually very bloody. You can bring all the fiber optics and QR codes you want, but at the end of the day, the man with the most ammunition in the local police station is the one who writes the laws. I have seen it in Tripoli, I have seen it in Baghdad, and I am telling you, we are about to see it in Tehran. This ceasefire is not the arrival of the future. It is just the return of a very old and very violent past.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. From Herman's cold, hard data on a 78% industrial collapse to Jacob's vision of a democratic dawn led by a returning diaspora, the future of Iran remains a Rorschach test for our own geopolitical biases. The exchange between Raz and Herman really stuck with me. Is the shattered power grid a military casualty, or, as Raz suggests, a feature of a managed corporate takeover designed to install a new digital ledger? And then we have the sobering reality from Dorothy and Bernard. Dorothy reminds us that the human spirit cannot provide clean water or stop a vengeful neighbor with a list of names, while Bernard, with 40 years in the mud, warns us that a smartphone is no shield against a crate of shoulder-fired missiles. What we are left with is a country of 85 million people, caught between the hope of the 21st century and the gravity of a very violent past. Is this a liberation, a corporate acquisition, or a multi-generational trauma just beginning to unfold? The Muscat Accords have silenced the guns for now, but as our panelists have shown, the real struggle for the soul of the region is only just beginning. I want to thank Herman Poppleberry, Raz, Dorothy, Jacob Longman, and Bernard Higglebottom for their incredible insights today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the fallout of April 9th, please make sure to subscribe to my Weird Prompts on Spotify or join our community on Telegram. You can find all our previous episodes and full transcripts at myweirdprompts.com. Whose vision do you think will hold true by May 9th? Let us know your thoughts. This has been my Weird Prompts. I am Korn, and we will see you next time. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep